Hello and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, good morning to some of us, good
All right,
evening to others.
good point.
We'll go ahead and kick off here in about 2 minutes.
Sounds good.
Love to see you guys out there. I see Genevieve with her camera on. Hey, Sasha, good to see you from Germany. All right. Well, we are 3 minutes past start time. So I'm going ahead and kick us off. Welcome back to many of you. If this is your first time, and I do hear a little bit of reverberation, so if you're not on mute, you might want to check that. But if this is your first time, we are a collection of interior scapers and suppliers from around the globe who meet up to discuss the latest strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and just impacts to our businesses. My name is Josh Senif. I am the president and CEO of Natura, and I'll be hosting our discussion today. If you missed last month's topics on tariffs, it certainly doesn't take long for a lot of that information to go a little bit stale. Certainly, the process and things that we talked about there still are very relevant. But it certainly is indicative of some turbulent environments that we are certainly operating in. So, encourage you to go check that out. What did we see today as of this morning? It was announced that the tariffs on Chinese goods are going to be reduced to 30%, which is an 80% decrease for the next 90 days. And how all this plays out is certainly still unknown as factories start to spin back up and shipping lines work through all that congestion of pent-up demand that we see sitting at the ports. We certainly expect to see those shipping rates increase, and the timing of delivery of some of that product is still really unknown. Which brings us to today's topic. Leading your company through uncertainty. We at Natura have a very optimistic approach to almost everything. But what is it that we as interiorscapers should be aware of? And what are the things that we can learn from those who have weathered the storm? And for that, we're going to turn to Irina Pakamova. She is a familiar face to many of us out here. She's led her Interiorscape company in Ukraine through thick and thin, and I'd be willing to bet that that is quite an understatement. She holds degrees in international economics and business and just has a great understanding of both the macro and micro effects that this uncertainty can cause. So, um, with that, we hope to leave you with some tools and certainly a lot of things to be thinking about as we continue this discussion on how, at the end of the day, we can lead our companies and lead them well. We've reserved quite a bit of time for Q&A at the end, so there is a Q&A feature. You can go ahead and type in your questions. You can also raise your hand. There's going to be a lot of topics that we're going through. So if you feel that there's a question that comes up that's relevant to that discussion, please, by all means, we want this to be more of a dialogue than a monologue. So type out your questions or raise your hand, and we'll get that discussion going. So with all that said, Irina, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Am I muted? I think I'm unmuted. Yeah. Well,
You are good.
awesome. Welcome everyone. It's amazing to be here today, and there's a lot of familiar faces for me. Maybe my face is familiar to many. But for those who see me for the first time, I want to briefly introduce myself. So my name is Irina. The most difficult question is where I'm from, because I'm Ukrainian national, currently living in the Netherlands, holding dual citizenship, but basically doing my business globally. I'm an interiorscaper, like all of you, most of you, with 18 years in experience, and I'm also coincidentally an economist by education. So two of my companies, One Big Green and Nurture Sensor Systems, they are serving interiorscaping market globally. So every day I talk to interiorscapers from all over the world, and I see hear a lot of perspectives. And the first floral company, as Joshua mentioned, is my interiorscaping company in Ukraine. 18 years old, and we sadly say that we sort of specialize in crisis, because in this 18 years we had a crisis of a sort every 2-3 years. And yeah, well, you work with what you have, and we managed to develop certain tools and certain methods of analysis, which I hope would be useful to the industry today. The bottom line is the world is rapidly changing. No use in denying that, and everyone can see that and feel that, whether you're in the U.S., in Europe, or elsewhere. And basically, what we need to do, we need to learn to adapt, to foresee, to anticipate, and adapt your internal and external processes to lead your business through the certain turbulence. We have most of the participants today from the United States, so we wanted to basically kick off with a very simple explanation or a summary of what's going on and what to expect of it, as impartial as it gets, and through the eyes of an economist. So basically everything that is happening right now, tariffs, negotiations, currency fluctuations, everything that you see is the sign of the new economic policy of the US government. And the ultimate goal of that is, well, no again, no sense in denying, is to improve the country's trade balance, basically to export more than you import. And it's absolutely a wise strategy in the long run, and it's gonna benefit the country a lot, but it will be harsh in the short term, because you can already see there's a lot of fluctuations. But it's not just the US, because I talk to a lot of companies globally, and the domino effect is already happening. And some countries are imposing the response tariffs. Some countries, typical where the product is typically manufactured, are revising their production plans. So it now concerns all of us. Actually, if you think about it, there's not too many scenarios that can come out of this, and even statistically, there can only be one of the four of what might follow, regardless of the news today, tomorrow, and in a couple of months from now. So one of the scenarios, and you need to understand these scenarios, because in each of these scenarios, there's going to be a certain aftermath. One of the scenarios is the reversion. If all the measures that were announced are going to be completely reversed. Another one is something that we discussed on the previous session, on navigating the uncertainties, the adaptation scenario, something that Jason from ASI mentioned, how they're trying to rework their supply chain to adapt. So eventually, the adaptation scenario might happen, and the supply chains will readjust, make corrections to their ways of working to face this new reality. Another one is the absorption. So basically, everyone is going to say, okay, well, it is what it is, new prices, new reality, and we're going to learn to live with that. And the shrunk consumption is another pattern that you might anticipate, is when everyone say, okay, this product is too expensive now post the measures, so we're just going to limit the consumption. If we needed it for lower price, but we don't need it for higher price, so we'll just learn to live without this product. But each of these scenarios is going to have certain effects on the interiorscaping industry, and some of these effects we're already seeing. So in reversion scenario, also something we discussed at the last session. So some of the manufacturers are already revising their production plans because they expect lower demand. So they're trying to repurpose their production facilities to the products they think would be more in demand. And that might result in certain goods not being available anymore. And I'm mostly talking about the holiday decor right now, but we'll touch on that later. Adaptation scenarios is probably the mildest one, so eventually things will settle. But since there's still going to be big reshuffle in supply chains, you can expect higher prices. Well, absorption scenarios means higher prices much sooner, because basically the added cost will be just added to the current prices. And the shrunk consumption is the one that imposes the most of the risk for the interiorscaping industry, because at some point, the customers might think that the plants and the plant services, not being the first necessity, are not worth a new price. So we're going to talk about how to work with that. Shrinking scenario seems like the healthiest one. So if we cannot afford it, let's not buy it. But it also has some hidden effects. So if the everything goes into this scenario, then we can expect the country's economy will slow down. The government might want to stimulate with the economy by lowering the interest rates, and I can already read a lot about the push being made from the administration. Lower rates means cheaper loans, so technically good, but that will also pump money into economy, decreasing the increasing the money mass, and by the typical law of supply and demand, the value will decrease, and that might result in inflation. So basically, no matter which scenario you talk, there's going to be some turbulence. And adaptation and absorption scenarios, as I mentioned, will likely result in an increase in the product prices, and that will be trailed with the increase of the labor rate, 6 to 12 months roughly, and that is one of the biggest risks for the interiorscaping industry, because we are really dependent on the labor rate. So the dilemmas of the smaller and mid-sized businesses are the dilemmas is as follows. So how do you adjust your pricing? Because if you adjust it too little, then you'll be operating at loss and possibly hurt your business a lot. But if you raise your prices too much, there's going to be some cutoff point when your customers will say, okay, we don't want the services for this price, so you'll start losing the customers. So today we're going to talk about how to manage. And there's a trick that basically we figured out when going through every round of the economic turbulence with my Ukrainian company. The trick is to do the forecasting and try to forecast which of the costs will rise sooner and which of the costs will rise later, because they're not going to rise at the same time. And then shift your sales narratives, shift your pricing to get your pricing to follow the market and new cost structure. And today we're going to talk about a lot of useful tips on how you can actually do that. But before that, just a quick thing that I thought would be really relevant. in Ukraine, we're a relatively small economy, and we're really import dependent in plants and planters, etc. For the larger, stronger economies, you probably never really thought about the impact of your country's currency on your mostly domestic business. But the currency in the economic turbulence is actually one of the risk factors that you must not overlook. So the currency basically it works like the stock market. The value is determined through the supply and demand, and both domestic and global. And there's certain things that might be happening to economy that will increase or decrease the value of the currency. One of them is the inflation rate, the interest rate, which is regulated by the central banks, the capital flow, the overall political situation, and well, basically what is happening to the country and with the country on the global arena. There are also a lot of tools that each of the governments has to regulate that, and it's way more complex than we can cover in 1 hour. But just something for you to remember that the government can regulate it through certain manual fixes, and the government or governments will regulate it through these manual fixes. But all of this is temporary because the market will eventually correct that. But through these manual fixes, because for example, if certain restrictions are applied on how much currency you can stock up onto as an importer, or how much loans you can take to cover the deficit, that can make a big short-term difference. And basically, why is it important for you? Because everyone is talking about the tariffs right now, as well, especially the U.S. Community, but tariffs is not everything, because if at the same time the country has a weaker currency, your suppliers who import the products, the finished products, or the raw materials to produce domestically, they will be paying invoices in the country where they're buying from. Meaning that if your own currency is weaker, then they would have to pay more US dollars or more euros or more pesos for the product that they're bringing into the country. So that's basically one of the factors that can affect the purchasing costs in the short term. But also, if you understand where everything is headed, you can make long-term forecasts, and also you can make supplies. And this is especially relevant for the suppliers, because, for example, if you forecast that the currency is going to plummet, you might want to prepay your supplies. You might want to stock up on the product just to mitigate these currency risks. Again, really complex subject, but I wanted to mention this because many domestic companies, they often forget that this is a huge factor in their purchasing costs. And if you don't really want to dig deep into that, at least figure out which are the currency pairs that are most relevant for your business. For example, US dollar to Chinese yuan, or US dollar to euro, and watch those, because by watching those trends, you can see what might be coming and what might be happening to your purchasing prices.
Irina, just gonna add onto
Yeah.
that. We're uniquely positioned on the service side and the supplier side with importing of Volcaponic. And what we saw is when the tariffs went up, obviously that made it more expensive, but the freight, the shipping, the ocean freight went down because a lot of people weren't bringing it in. But where we then started to feel the squeeze was on the exchange rate. And a small drop, like 5 basis points, ended up increasing that quite a bit. Fortunately, even today, we've seen a sharp drop, or the dollar become quite a bit stronger as it relates to the euro. It's moving in the right direction. But yes, by all means, kind of a real life example of what we were seeing there with the exchange rate.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes when you come from a weaker economy, a smaller country, you kind of think in a foreign currency. Like, for example, if in Ukraine, if we're buying selling houses from each other, we always make a deal in US dollar, because by the time when the notary does this deed, the exchange rate can change so much. that the value is going to be different. So we are used to think in different currencies, but for the American companies that might be new, and my message here is that you might need to read up on this, because that's a huge impact, and you might not have realized that before. But that leads me to the next point, because basically any country's economy is like a Rubik's cube. So let's say you want to assemble it differently, or the country administration wants to assemble it differently. They try to improve one side, but that means that they have to reassemble the other sides. And well, I have a lot of trust in people that manage the countries, most of them. But this whole reassembly process is going to come with a lot of unknowns and uncertainty and turbulence. So basically, your job as a small or mid-sized or even larger business is to make it through the reassembly until the Rubik's Cube is assembled again. And to be honest, there's actually very little that you can change. And you can voice your opinions to the senators, and you can make explanations to the government, trying to explain how that affects your businesses and the industry overall. But even if that has effect, that's going to be a long-term effect before anything can change. So the best you can do is watch, analyze, and adapt within your company to live through this period of uncertainty, and actually come out of it healthy as a business. But when I say watch, a big question is actually what to watch, and it might be useful to take a look at the at our industry from the standpoint of the structure of the supply chain. So, well, each of your companies would have a different proportion of these services, but most of these companies, they have at least three of these. And there are certain things that are needed for these services that you provide. So for interior, for example, plants and planters are the main cost factors, and labor is a part of that. New exterior is dependent on plants and labor. Holiday is dependent on the holiday decor, supplies, and labor. And your service contract is dependent on labor, and to a lesser extent, the domestic transportation. So if you look at the structure, check the things that have the most arrows pointed at them, being plants and being labor. But that's just your supply chain, and you buy from suppliers that also have a certain supply chain. And if you look at the suppliers that provide plants and planters and other hardware or holiday decor supplies, it looks as follows. So plants are dependent on the domestic labor rate, also energy costs, because the certain electricity is getting used, and domestic transportation before the plant gets to you and your region. Local producers of planters and other hardware, they depend on the labor rate domestic. They also have to import the raw materials, pay for the international transportation, and also domestic transportation. Imported planters and other hardware, they depend on the purchasing prices of the finished products and international transportation. And holiday decor, pretty much the same. Cost of finished products, international transportation, and distributing it within the country. So again, we see a lot of areas pointing at domestic labor rate, and a lot of areas pointing at transportation, as Joshua mentioned, is a really big factor. So to actually summarize it from the two previous infographics, what makes sense to watch if you want to make a certain analysis of what's coming and how it's going to affect your costs. First thing, domestic labor rate, because practically every service of you and every product of your supplier is somewhat dependent on that. And a factor of that is inflation. So if you know where inflation is going, then you can see what's going to happen to labor rate. Naturally, the cost of imported goods and international transportation, no brainer, dependent on the currency value and also the tariffs. Domestic transportation, depending on the fuel prices, and of course the energy prices are also relevant for what we all are doing. You would ask how to watch, and I want to share one excellent tool that that they gave us at the business school. It's called Trading Economics. It's a website, tradingeconomics.com, and it basically gives you a ton, well, actually not a ton, but 20 million macro indicators from pretty much all the world. It's completely free, so you can watch any indicator that you like, but watch out for the method of reporting, because for example, if we talk about the GDP, different countries report GDP differently. Some report quarter on quarter, some reported annualized. So if you really want to understand this, do some reading, but this is an excellent tool that can help you orientate and at least see the trends and make certain forecasts. But there's actually one more fun thing that I wanted to share today. So let's step aside from the theory and jump into another theory, but it's going to be a fun theory. The prisoner's dilemma. And don't get me wrong, nobody's going to prison. But the prisoner dilemma is actually a thought experiment that they teach economists. And this thought experiment helps you understand how people or parties act if they're given a choice in certain environment of uncertainty. Boils down to the following. So imagine the police detained two prisoners for something minor, and police doesn't really have enough evidence to charge them, but police suspects that there's a bigger crime behind it. And each of the prisoners is given a choice. Do you remain silent, and then you serve a smaller term and provide the evidence on your suspected partner, or do you confess? And you can see on the screen basically the matrix of the outcomes for the prisoners. The bottom line of this thought experiment, and in this thought experiment, the prisoners, they're not allowed to talk to each other. So each of them is supposed to make a decision individually, whether they betray their partner or whether they remain silent and try to make the best for the two of them. And again, this is a thought experiment to model the human behavior. And I was thinking that it actually somewhat relates to the situation that we're seeing right now. And again, nobody's going to prison, but the situation is as follows. So there's a certain added cost that is pushed into the supply chain in the form of tariffs, in the form of currency rate, in the form of whatever. And the supply chain can choose either protect their own interests. So every participant says, oh, it's going to get more expensive, so I'm just going to increase my own price by the percentage that we're seeing. Or the supply chain can cooperate and come up with the solution that would distribute the added cost evenly and across the supply chain. In economics, and there's been a lot of modeling how this works, typically the typical solution is that if parties do not cooperate with communicate with each other, they tend to act in out of their own interest. So everyone is going to be trying to maximize their own benefit, by that multiplying the total punishment. But my point is that this is just a thought experiment, and the reality is, and the reality that I know in the States and Canada, in most of the EU countries, is that you actually know your suppliers by the name and by the face, and you can beat the odds by regularly talking to the suppliers and being mutually open about what's happening, and therefore help mitigate the effect of the added cost that is pushed down the whole supply chain, such as if suppliers share with the others as much in advance as possible what they're seeing in terms of the increase of the prices, which is something that we did on the last session. And if the buyers are open about what's happening in the market and what's happening to the demand on the plants and the planters, then suppliers can adjust accordingly as well. In Ukraine, we didn't have that privilege because we have 1 million small suppliers, and actually with the start of war, 2/3 of these suppliers just shut down their businesses and left the country. But nowadays you still have that tool. So my urge and my message is, you will receive the best results for the whole supply chain if you cooperate, talk openly, honestly with each other and regularly, because if you're informed, you can make better decisions. And now we go to the practice. How are we doing time-wise?
Very
Doing
good. Yeah.
Awesome. So now let's talk about the practical tools, because now we used to talk about the macro stuff and understanding what's going on, but there's actually a lot that you can do inside your company to mitigate your own risks and improve your survival rate, so to speak. All of this comes from practice. All of this comes from hard-earned lessons from my other company, and I want to share a couple of tools that we actually made up that helped us through the storm. And a little spoiler: I'm super proud to say that I have an amazing team in Ukraine on the ground, and many people think this is unbelievable, but in over 3 years of full-scale war, we actually had only 1 month at loss by using these tools and adapting as quickly as possible to the reality that I really wouldn't wish on anyone. So the first tool I wanted to share is the 3-round quote recalculation. Sounds fancy, but it's simple. So if you're doing proposals on the new projects and your customer takes too long to approve that proposal, you might be dragged into the project with a tiny or even negative margin that you still have to fulfill because you want to retain your customer. So what we do, or what we did, or what we keep doing, we recalculate our quotes 3 times. So three times. So first time we do it when the customer comes to us and says, I want plans, I want services, etc., just to orientate. The second time, and it can take anyway from 1 day and a couple of years, when the client comes back and says, yes, I'm gonna go for it. Before you sign, you recalculate again because your costs have changed already. But there's still some things you can regulate, such as, for example, a discount they might be asking. And then the third time you do it, after all your procurement was made and all your purchasing prices were fixed. Because after the second round, you can see if there's any room for a discount, or will you even take on this project, or because maybe at this point it's just cheaper for you to say no. And after all the procurement was made, you still need to execute on the project, and it's mostly labor and transportation and all sorts of service goodies that we provide to our clients for the excellent service that you can regulate. And if you see that you have very little room left, then just adjust those service goodies, because well, in the long run you actually need your company to survive. Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
Just very recently, what we've looked at, and typically our contracts would, or quotes that we would put out would say, hey, this is valid for 30 days. With what we're seeing in all the fluctuations in pricing, we lowered that to 7 days. And then the other thing that we reevaluated was our discount structures, and effectively lowering them, removing some others. In light of news today, that's probably going to change tomorrow. But again, to your point here, what is it that you're looking at, and at what point are we reevaluating or recalculating what our offering is to our customers, and really minimizing what it is that we're committed to when we're providing a quote to them.
Yeah, very fair point. And actually, sometimes, especially if you're doing new developments, you get the request for proposals very, very in advance. And even 30 days is not going to cut it, because they first want to know the price, and then they go through all sorts of approvals, and then they come back half a year later. So if you still want that client, I would advise on making an amendment in the quote that it is a subject to recalculation, because everyone understands what's going on, and I think that most of the customers would be understanding. So yeah, basically you don't need to turn down the projects, but make those amendments, because they give you some leeway, and then you can still see whenever the customer returns, what you're going to do with them, and how you're going to execute. Another thing, another tool I wanted to mention is the reverse calculation of the quote. So let's say you have your quote that you quoted. It might make sense to do. So how do you usually make a quote? So this is my product cost. These are my plants. These are my planters. This is the labor commute. Whatever goes into that. This is the markup and minus the discount, and this is my sale price. But it might be useful to do it the other way around. So take your draft proposal, deduct the things that you don't really control, such as your material cost, such as a share of OPEX, because it has to be attributed to all the projects that you do. Deduct the target margin. So let's say you want to make whatever, 15%, 20%, 30, 50, whatnot on that project. Well, just to be blunt and honest, the margins will shrink, and that's a no-brainer. So be realistic about the margin that you want to achieve, but still keep a number in mind, and because that gives you a guideline which projects you will do and which you will not do. So let's say target margin. Deduct all of that in reverse order from your sale price, and then you see how much is left for the items that you can actually regulate, the labor, the goodies, and the discounts. And it's a really useful exercise to actually ensure that you make your margin. Josh?
Yeah, I think this is something we could certainly get a little bit better about, just being quicker to update our costs associated with certain products. One thing that we do look at is the gross margin on those projects. Again, you've got to be quick to update those costs in your system. But our sales folks are looking at that, and that actually impacts the commission rate that they will then be paid. So they're motivated to get that to a level that obviously makes sense to the business, but certainly then makes sense to them because it drives their commission.
Yeah, also something that I want to mention, and well, as I work with a lot of interiorscaping companies, especially the smaller ones, this is what I see. Is, well, OPEX is normally being absorbed. So your operational expense is just you expense it once a period, month, year, whatnot, quarter, and you do not really evaluate the share of the OPEX in your cost structure. But let's say, just a rough example. So let's say you're selling only projects, and you sold for, let's say, $1 million, and you incurred let's say 500,000 of operational expenses, for example. In this case, well, naturally the share of OPEX will be 50%. But if you sold less, if your sales dropped, and OPEX is quite rigid, so you can optimize it, but it's not as flexible as your direct costs. Then the weight of the OPEX in your cost structure is going to be heavier because your base is now smaller. And if you do several services or products at the same time, if you change the structure, so you sell more service projects and sell less new installs, don't lose sight of that OPEX weight. And I even urge to say see it as a variation, is a type of the direct cost, because it really can affect your margin, because you think, okay, we always make 35% on the service contract, but that is under current sales and the current OPEX. If one of that changes, then the balance changes as well. So it's really important to watch as well.
Yeah,
Now,
I think really what you're talking about there is overhead, as we all probably think about it, and that is a lot more difficult to change that, to lower it. But now's the time to do it. At least at a minimum, know what the things that you're paying for that are not mission critical to your ability to fulfill these projects, so that if push comes to shove and you need to trim some of that, you're very easily able to do that. Craig, I see that you have your hand up. Would love to hear from you.
So the OpEx expenses, is that fixed or is it variable or is it both?
I think we're talking about fixed overhead
Okay.
expenses.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I just wanted to
So
clarify.
operational expense, what you pay no matter how much you sold.
Yep.
Yeah.
Leases
Okay,
and things of that nature.
we move on. Okay, we move on to one of my favorite subjects, the service contracts. And actually, looking back, in practically any major economic crisis we've been through in Ukraine, it's actually the service that kept us afloat because, well, we all know and we all love our recurring revenue. But with the volatile costs, and we also know that these service contracts are typically long term, and especially if it's the plant lease, you also calculate for 3 years upfront, for 5 years upfront, etc. And if your important factors change, such as, for example, labor rate, you still have to deliver on that contract, and it's long term, and you cannot change the price. So what I urge to do, and this is what we did, and we keep doing in my Ukrainian company, we calculate what I call a mini P&L for each of the accounts. It doesn't have to be like a formal P&L. It can be one big spreadsheet where you track your costs per account, but it's essential that they're per account. Again, I with One Big Green, I work with a lot of companies globally, and I often see that even the technician hours are regarded as OpEx. So whatever we pay to the technicians, we just write it off and we forget about it, and we try to make it less next time. Huge mistake, because I tend to say not all the service contracts were made equal. Sometimes you project one amount of man hours and commute and service extras into that account, but de facto is really different, because the client is really needy and they have all sorts of extra requests, or their facilities somewhere where the technician gets stuck in the traffic jams and all these things. So a lot of small details that can make a huge difference between the plan and the fact. So the purpose of this tracking per account is that you can actually spot the accounts that still have some leeway for for the increased cost, and you can also see the accounts that are balancing on the break-even point. And if your labor rate jumps up out of a sudden, your break-even will become a loss. So that's really important to actually build the system that does that. And in One Big Green, and if someone doesn't know, that's the field management software for the interior-scaping industry. That's one of my companies. We build it in a way that we can basically track every nitty-gritty thing, including the replacements, including the time and the commute, etc., per account, and give you a very clear visibility of where you are within the budget or where you are outside of it. Josh, any additions on P&Ls?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, there's a lot of areas in our businesses to lose money, and so identifying, which those are is certainly important. And in fact, me and my team we were talking this morning about it, and where we feel we're really strong is being able to maintain those margins on the service contracts. Where we and probably many others get pretty loose with it is on those installations, right? We have this get it done, whatever it takes mentality, however many hours it takes, however many additional supplies, that it takes. And so getting down to truly job costing those initial installations. And then obviously what we're talking about right here with that ongoing maintenance is critical. Just A, to be able to know, and then B, be able to identify what it is that you can do in light of what you're seeing, whether that be specific to some accounts or trending across, all of your accounts.
I'm smiling because I absolutely can feel that, and we actually had this very conversation in my Ukrainian team recently. My CEO, she's absolutely a salesperson. She's a people's person, and she wants everyone happy and the customers happy in the first place. So she will do anything, including costly extras on service, to make the customer happy, and everyone loves her. Well, except for me as the owner of the company. And we were really struggling with the same thing as well, because we're trying to please the customer by all means possible. And Ukraine is really has really spoiled market in terms of the service standards and orientations. We, for the record, some accounts we do twice a week, and it's not like the plants need that, but it's the client needs that. So it's a very different market with high expectations. But in January, I changed the CFO, and the new CFO arrived and said, this has to end. And we basically built the system that pushes a notification in the CEO's mailbox each time we're stepping out of these minimal margins that we need to make, and then it's a different MO to kind of reduce that. But yeah, pleasing customers is great, but you actually have to retain the balance between pleasing and keeping your business sustainable, because if your customers are happy but your business is bankrupt, that's not a really good outcome.
You know, and I think we underestimate how willing customers are to pay for things. For example, new construction. How many times do we, get the team pulled together, get all the products there, and they're not ready for us? Even when they say, "Hey, we need it here today." And a lot of times that invoice doesn't go out, for those additional trip charges or multiple trips that it takes to get those installations done. And we're just not having those conversations. Michael, I see you have your hand up. Would love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I just wanted to add, in terms of service contracts, I think routing becomes really important in this discussion as well. And it may be the next slide, I don't know, but I just didn't want to leave that unsaid. I think having really efficient routes can help your P&L as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we are going to go through that.
Yeah, I was not planning on mentioning it today, but since it came up, I'm actually going to mention it. So next week, One Big Green organizes a webinar on the basically latest update of our project, and we are building the interiorscaping specific routing. So I'll just make sure everyone gets an invitation. If that's something you're interested in, then jump in next week. We're going to talk about it in greater detail. Okay, we move on. One more tool that you can consider is more flexible service programs, and we played with that a lot in the, let's say, first half a year of the war, our latest challenge, because we wanted to retain the customer by all means possible, but kind of regular service interval didn't make any sense whatsoever because of the circumstances. So we developed the flexible programs that basically entail less visits while still guaranteeing the quality and sticking with the replacement warranty if needed. So in the end, the customer receives the same result, but there's a different cost structure behind it. And in the end, they buy the end result, right? And how we do it is our own job. So yeah, with that in mind, well, Josh, maybe you can tell a bit more about a trick you can do with Volcaponic.
Yeah, absolutely. Our heart behind Volcaponic was, how do we pay our people more, right? And part of what we're getting at is, obviously our team's got to be just have a sense of confidence in what it is that we're driving. And one of the things was, well, how do we pay them more? If we can't continue to, increase our prices to, our customers, there's going to be a threshold where, people feel like it might not be worth it. How do we continue to drive more into the people who are doing the work? And the reality is, like, they've got to manage more revenue. As Michael was saying, we got to be routed efficiently. I'd much rather put that money in their pockets, versus just reimbursing it for fuel expenses and so on and so forth. And to be able to manage more revenue, they have to become more efficient, And to become more efficient, routing goes into that, but so does lugging water to plants less frequently. And so that's why we at Natura have started to retrofit our accounts, and Jacob can check me on this. I think we're close to 20% of our accounts being retrofitted in Volcaponic. But what that allows us to do is to achieve a 25% reduction in labor. In other words, they're able to manage more revenue, and we're able to bring in more margin that we've actually shared with them. And so their pay rates have gone up as a result of us becoming more efficient. It's great for the company, obviously, because we're able to bring in a higher tiered individual who's going to provide better service to our clients, and at the end of the day, they're making more. But what that tension is that you're always trying to look at, well, if I'm becoming more efficient in the accounts, what happens to quality, right? Like we as interiorscapers are always trying to balance that. And it's crazy to us how well the plants respond to Volcaponic. They're not taking up less water. We're just there providing water to them less frequently, and they look better as a result.
Yeah, and as a European, I can second that because, well, I have a lot of customers in Europe, and I see most of them are using either volcaponic or full hydro. Full hydro, unfortunately, is not available in the US because it's tied to the supply of the hydro grown plants. But yeah, what I can see, the soil-based horticulture in Europe has died long ago, and it's either volcaponic or hydro. So yeah, trust me, worth exploring because this is really effective tool to cut your cost while still keeping your customers happy. Next thing, stress testing. That's actually one of my favorite exercises in Excel because I have a mild addiction to Excel. It's really easy to do because you basically have all your numbers, how much you spend on your labor, well, ideally per type of employee, how much you spend on plants and how much you spend on fuel. Do some sort of modeling. So try to see how your P&L is going to look if, for example, if labor rate goes X% up, if your fuel prices go Y% up, or if your plant prices go Z up. And this is because each of the companies, they have a different structure of the cost, because if you do more maintenance, then you're going to be sensitive more to the labor rate. If you do more installs, then you're more sensitive to the plant prices. Also applies to the exterior. If you have massive exterior, then you're dependent on plant prices as well because they're more expensive. So basically, this exercise helps you spot the biggest sensitivities in your business model. And if you see that there's one or more parameters in this that your model is sensitive to, then do invest a lot of time in untying yourself from this dependency by either shifting what you sell to the customers or somehow figuring out the ways to protect yourself from an increased cost in the specific product group. And yeah, we move on to the next thing that I wanted to share. So naturally, and yeah, I think I could make a separate talk about this some other day. In the times of economic turbulence, the customers also happen to have different patterns, behavioral patterns, and different needs. And what we see, like Swiss watch, every time there's another round of turbulence. So what we see that suddenly our selling propositions stop working. So when we try to sell the healthy environment, easy recruitment, sustainability, healthy office, blah blah blah, the customers become less susceptible to that because it's the harsher is the crisis, the faster everyone is rolling down that Maslow's pyramid of human needs from the very high level things to how do we actually survive. So these arguments might stop working for you. Also, we see that there's a dependency. So if there's a prolonged recession, the development, which is the new development projects that are really dependent on, let's say, consumer sentiment and just overall optimism about the economic situation, everything starts stalling because less investment, people are not sure about the economic climate, so they freeze the projects and they freeze your plans with these projects. Also, we see that the customers start leaning towards shorter commitments, so it becomes much more difficult to sell 3-year lease, 5-year lease, because they don't want to get tied to that long. And if your whole model is based on making your money in the second, third year, etc., then you might not even have that option anymore. And of course, and as usual, very, very big increase in receivables. So people will companies or people will delay payments, and that of course is going to affect your cash flow. So what to do? One of the first things I would personally implement is the rigorous receivable control, because sometimes, oh, the customer delayed the payment. Well, next time it's going to be better. But if you actually put a finger on the pulse in your receivables, you won't miss the moment when the customer will stop paying completely. And if you see the increase in debts from the customers, this is your time to offer these new flexible programs to at least retain them, because if they start delaying the payments, then it's not going to be long until they might cancel the contract. So if you approach them in time and offer them something else that would be more suitable to their situation, then you might be able to retain them. Also, I keep saying it's not always doom and gloom like 24/7, because in any economic turbulence, there are good news, bad news. Like today, we started with potentially good news, and the markets are really sensitive to that. So in the momentums of like, hey, we're going to survive, it's going to be good, this is the time to approach your customers and secure the long-term contracts. Because if they believe that tomorrow is going to be bright, they'll be more likely to sign longer commitments. And if tomorrow it's doom and gloom again, then at least you've secured your contract on the terms based on the positivity. And something else that we like, I gave a talk at TPAE earlier this year, and something that I also shared, because I was talking about adapting the sales approaches in Ukraine during the war. Trust me, it's not easy to sell the plans when the rockets are flying. But we still somehow managed to. So what we've done, we looked at our services with the eyes of the customers, that also the business customers predominantly, that also have a goal to survive in the economic turbulence, which means they need to come across as a stable business to their customers. So we basically started selling them the image of their business being stable through top-notch plans at their offices, receptions, etc. Because if their customers see that they still have money for the plans, then they would have more certainty in them as a supplier, as a business, etc. And it magically worked. And we still do the new development projects, like right on the front line, selling all these things with this specific notion that, well, hey, you also need to make it as a business, so the plans can contribute to the image of everything is good in your company, and you will stay afloat as well. And one more thing I wanted to cover before we go into Q&A, and I don't think we even have much time left.
Yeah, we do. Let me throw it to, before you hit
Yeah.
on that, let me throw it to Michael real quick. He's got his hand raised.
Yeah, it's more of a, so outlook is really important, right?
Yeah.
And but I'm curious if many of the participants on the call are experiencing hedge decision making, stalling currently. If we're finding that it's a longer time period to secure those signatures. I don't know how you guys are doing, but I'm curious.
Yeah, let me bring Jacob into that conversation. Certainly, as we we're approaching the presidential election, we saw kind of a micro view into that, just with the uncertainty that was created there. Did it really make a big difference to them one way or another? In some cases, yes. In many cases, no. But just the sense of uncertainty, we saw some very delayed decisions that people were making. And interestingly, as soon as it was determined, we did see an increase in sales. Jacob, anything to add or in terms of what we're experiencing right now as of Liberation Day, are we seeing any delays or declines?
No, not really. Not the way that we saw it around the election. I think we saw, a little bit of delay just as those tariffs kicked off, but it seemed to be very short-lived. And as we were able to come back to the customers and say, hey, like this is what our plan is, this is what we're doing. In fact, from the holiday standpoint, we've seen our holiday pick up from being able to say, guys, it's like it's from a supply chain, we need to get you in now because we don't know how much product there's going to be. So it created a sense of urgency. I think we've probably had our best first half of the year holiday sales that we've ever had, and the amount of contracts coming through currently just from holiday. In fact, I just literally just saw one come through, very large contract that could have very easily been delayed or pushed off. So yeah, I mean we're seeing it continuing to move forward. I don't see a whole lot of delay. I think too it has to do with who your customer base is. There may be delays on some of this new construction stuff, but again, these things that are already moving, they're already moving. The stuff is already in the plans. That I don't know that it's going to get value engineered out quite at this point. But yeah, I mean, I hope that kind of provides some clarity.
That's good. I appreciate you sharing the insight. In any time frame when there's volatility, business kind of reacts, and so that's a good reaction, right? So that's good. Thank you.
I would tell you we were very quick to communicate what it is that we were seeing, what we're doing in light of that, and what we foresee, happening in light of tariffs and things like that. So to the point of some of the slides previously that we discussed, openly communicating what the situation is, and at the end of the day, what we can do and what we need from them to be able to, at the end of the day, bring holiday cheer to their offices or new plants or whatever, was really important to them, and just creates, that sense of, obviously we need to know you're making a decision pretty quickly, but just a sense of confidence that we're instilling with them.
Yeah, I was gonna go down that path too, Josh. And our focus has been being very transparent with our sales team. And in fact, sometimes it's like, hey guys, here's a scenario. I don't know what's going to happen. I'll let you know as soon as we have a decision on it. But the people out there selling for us have to be confident as well. And so we have to be the ones that are displaying that. I know one of the questions here is how to motivate a team during times of uncertainty and rising costs. That is our job, and to truly, in having our belief system around the fact that there is a belief of optimism that people still need our services and our products, even when there's high tariffs, high costs. I mean, Arena's doing it during wartime, right? And understanding like what is that value, and our focus is around the emotional aspect of the decision making, not the, like you said, not the features and benefits anymore. Not the, oh, it's cleaner air, it's this, it's that. It's what's the emotional aspect of saying no to our services. What does it look like to the organization to not have Christmas decor, come November? What does it look like to get rid of the plants? What does that do to the organization, to the, to the morale of your employees? And so really speaking to the emotional response or the emotional consequence of the customer not going with our product. And that's how we're able to continue to drive that need for it, and at many times at a higher price point.
Yeah, and that absolutely, that's actually, there's a slide on that, on how to manage people during the turbulence. And the first thing I put on that list is give your people reassurance. Sales team, the technicians team, basically all the team, because they really need it. Because if they believe in your company and your stability and your product, then they're gonna go out and spread that confidence to the customers, and the business will stay afloat. So yeah, I can only second that. And also communicating openly, honestly, regularly with your people. It's also, I keep saying that turbulent times is a really good opportunity to identify the fighters in the team, because some people tend to, duck and cover when something's bad happening. Some prefer to fight back, and actually it's really interesting to see how people show themselves, the team members, especially executives, in such turbulent times. So if you identify the fighters, well, basically these are your future generals. And it does make sense to involve them in the brainstorming, like what do we do today, what do we do tomorrow, and especially implementation. So that's back to the question of what can you do to keep people motivating, because if you make them a part of the fight on the side of the company, then when all of this ends and when the dust settles, they will have considerably more loyalty to the company, because they would know that they actually did it with their own hands, and they're a part of the success. So it really is important to bring everyone on board. And yeah, one more personal thing I want to say. Might sound as a joke, but it's not. It's really important to not to go crazy and all that. And as the company owner, as the owner of multiple companies, well, whenever some big things are happening that affects me personally, and I know for a fact that tired generals tend to make terrible decisions. And if this turbulence, whatever it is, prolongs, you as the company manager, as the company owner, will be under stress for a long time. So do take some attention to pay attention to yourself, to oneself, and take care of your own mental well-being, because you people can feel that. If you're exhausted, if you're not sure about tomorrow, then they're not going to be sure about tomorrow too. So don't compromise on that. Prioritize your own mental well-being, and everything is going to be all right. I guess Q&A.
Yeah, I love that you said that. One of the things we were talking about earlier was, there's not a whole lot here that you can change, but there certainly is a lot of things that you can control, and identifying what those things are, being very realistic about what those things are, and then creating a plan, to move forward with that. And then speaking to just not going crazy and in our ability to, manage our own headspace. We've all heard the adage, it's lonely at the top. Well, it is if you make it that way. And what I've seen is that when you can be transparent, when you are sharing with the team, like, hey, here are the tariffs we're dealing with. This is how much it means to the company. This is what we're going to need to do to be able to survive. And this is what's important for you and your role. And that may all change tomorrow, but giving that sense of confidence, giving people a feeling of control and an understanding of what's going on is going to go such a long way. I realized that I neglected to open up the Q&A, so that's why there's nothing in there right now. And so it is open if you'd like to go ahead and talk through that. We actually had some questions submitted prior to us getting kicked off. But Jacob, why don't you go ahead and kick off with one of those, and then if you'd like to raise your hand to comment on anything
like
that we've
got
done.
a question.
Okay,
here.
we got a hand raised.
Actually, it's not a question, it's an observation. Josh, I like what you did about rallying your troops, creating a plan. There's always a plan. Panic is never the option. And then sharing it with your team. Okay, yes. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I've always had the sense of optimism like you that things will work out. Let's share what the plan is and move on with it.
And when that plan changes and there's things that we need to do, I think back to 9/11 when John Minnie was talking about, hey, and I might get the numbers wrong, but he's like, I need your help to figure out how we are going to squeeze 10% out of the overhead that we have in place. They know ways where we can save money or ideas and things that we can do. And so bringing them into that conversation. I mean, you got to talk about it. Thanks, Al. Appreciate that.
All right. So yeah, a lot of the questions are around how to motivate a team during uncertainty, and I know we've talked a lot about that. But I want to read one specific one. I'd love to hear how others keep their team motivated and feeling like they have room to grow, especially when certain roles have a pay cap. How do you add value or offer new opportunities to employees to still feel like they're moving forward, even if their pay can't increase much more?
So you've had some time to think about that, Jacob. Maybe you have something to add to it. But for me, what I would say, bottom line, for our people to grow, we have to grow, right? We have to be doing the things, positioning our organization to be able to grow. And then, some of the things that we shared with pay rates, right? For a horticulturalist, like they can only manage so much revenue, which is only going to be able to dictate so much pay that we're able to pay them before we start digging deep into some margins. And so where is it that we can become more efficient? And I'm certain you business leaders, if you were to spend, a week focusing on where you can do that, you'd probably find 5 to 10% that you could squeeze out. It'll probably boggle your mind, but you got to be intentional about that. Know what your margin drivers are so that you can go look and see where you can continue to improve. Michael, you mentioned routing, probably one of the biggest areas of inefficiency that can happen. And it just drifts. It doesn't drift into a more efficient process most often, right? When our technicians are allowed to, change their route and because of this or that, a lot of times it's not improving the efficiency that we're driving there. And so just being very intentional about that. Jacob, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I would challenge the mindset that at any point in time, anything is capped, right? In that, I mean, that's a self-limiting belief, and it's not. We may be at a point where it's like, I don't yet know how to move this poor person forward or allow for extra margin, but I got to go and figure that out. And as leaders, that is our jobs, right? And identifying, things like, okay, well, what is the cost of replacing that person? If they leave. I know we've all gone through those scenarios of, how many months of salary it takes to replace how many plants is a new person going to kill, all that stuff. The other thing is if it's uncomfortable to say I'm putting in place an increase in my direct expenses, then it may be something that you're looking at. Maybe my overhead has some room in there where there are these one-off scenarios of a pay for performance incentive plans. In the past, we've had scenarios where employees have earned up to 15% of their annual comp in just additional incentives based off of performance. So building those types of things into their plan. And the other thing is just creating a very clear path forward. Even if it's not, I know exactly what this is going to look like. Let's say this is what I may like for this to look like as we grow and get to this point, then this happens, and give them some of that ownership and like, how do I grow? If you have a salesperson, it's like, hey, I'd love to be managing other salespeople. Be like, great. What I need from you is we need to grow, and you need to sell $1 million this year so that I can hire 2 more salespeople, so that then you can manage other salespeople. What is that plan for them? So again, I think, making sure that we're not having those self-limiting beliefs that something cannot happen, but it's our role to solve that problem and figure out how do we make that happen. So this is kind of my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, I also have something to add, by the way, because we took a slightly different route to motivating people. Of course, monetary incentives also matter. Well, I might have mentioned that we did an online training program because we had a really, really high rotation of people in the company because of our situation. So we automated onboarding, so you can actually get trained over the weekend with the basic skills, and then you're good to go to the field, but accompanied by mentors. and the mentors are more experienced technicians that get bonuses, that get whatever stars for sharing their knowledge, which also boosts their morale because they feel important. And we also invest a lot in the prestige of the plant technician profession. So my techs, they look as good as the flight attendants of the business class, like really fancy uniform, a lot of communication. I have a brilliant marketeer in the team. We have an HR, her job is recruitment, but the marketeer creates all these legends that actually make people to apply to the company, to train, to become technicians, although that's a really daunting job if you think about it.
Yeah.
Just because we made it fashionable. We share on Instagram how cool of the profession it is, how absolutely brilliant career you can have, and you can have it if you work hard, but we kind of circle around the non-monetary benefits, which also work really well along the bonuses.
That's great. I love that. All right. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts?
Genevieve.
So I think just to sort of jump on that conversation too, I think culture is so important, and it goes a really long way if you build an environment that people enjoy coming to work and being in. And, you know, there are days when maybe the hours aren't what you want them to be, or the work is a little more challenging for what you're getting paid. But if you are with people who are like-minded or friendly with each other, or have, you know, feel comfortable in their space, I think that goes a really long way in terms of motivation. I've seen it firsthand with my team and the team that we've been building over the last number of years, and how the shift of shoot, I just lost the word I was thinking of. Like turnover has dropped dramatically because we're committed to building a culture on our values, and then recognizing people when they demonstrate those values, and then having them recognize each other. It's not just from the top down, it's across the whole scope of the company, and calling each other out when they see people doing something that represents our values. And I think that makes a big difference, because I think for a lot of people, their work is, you know, their life. And if you can make their work life feel like they're valued day in and day out, it can help sometimes when maybe the dollars aren't totally where they need to be.
Right. Absolutely.
I actually happen to work with Interiorscape Company, and yeah, I can feel it as a supplier, because yeah, it brightens my day when I receive emails from that crew, because they really love what they're doing, and over time, something needs to be done, and it needs to be done. So yeah, great job on building that culture, because yeah, great team. So shall we wrap up, or do we have any more questions?
Yeah. Anything else, Jacob? Anything else on the?
Yeah. One other that's slightly different, and I think this has been a lot of what we're talking about, but any other ideas around recession proofing your business? I mean, I guess, again, I've kind of had a little bit of opportunity to think about some of these, and it seems to me like the best recession, I don't think there's anything as necessarily recession proof, but you're always trying to mitigate your risk. Right. So it's identifying, you know, for us, you know, at least it's identifying what customer base you are getting into. Are we getting into the startups that have private equity funding that could disappear tomorrow, depending on, you know, one person's decision? Or, you know, are we diversifying with our customer base? Is it all residential? Is it all hospitality? Or are we looking at a diversification between multi-tenant and tech and oil and gas and hospitality, where, you know, we're not seeing any one thing in the market causing a big, massive disruption in our organization? That's kind of the first thing that pops to my mind, is just focusing on that diversification of customers.
I think we also probably in really good times pick up a lot of expenses with those nice to haves, and having a list of knowing what those are. You know, as we approached our team and we were talking about, hey, this is the potential cash outlay that we're seeing with tariffs, and it was a really, really big number. But what people, I mean, think about that, guys. I mean, we were talking about holiday decor. That's a pretty small arena to be playing in. That's going to be extrapolated across the entire economy. That's something we're dealing with, but what are others dealing with? And how is that going to change the decisions that they're making? So, for example, we were also faced with a very large onboarding expense for a new software package. And although that is something that we are going to do, we've delayed a decision behind that. And so knowing what your priorities are, we kind of outlined that for us in the tariff conversation last month. And then what are those expenses that, at this point in time, we're going to, cut that. Irina had talked about that. We all start the year off with a budget that looks great when you're hitting those revenue targets, but when you're not, we have a propensity to not change those expenses that we had associated with that. And so at the end of the day, how is it that you are staying ahead of that based off of different metrics that you're looking at? And Irina brought up, places that you could go look for those, and certainly see them in our own businesses, hopefully not on the P&L because that's a rear view look. But what are those metrics that we're looking at that are indicative of decisions, sometimes hard decisions that we should be making?
Yeah, the other thing.
Oh, yeah, Jacob, please go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that I would be focusing on is knowing your vendor contracts, right? Knowing what leases you're in, what binding contracts you're in, negotiating those, and when you're getting into the new items, ensuring that you have a way to get out of those things, as well as having the best relationship you possibly can with your banker. Right? When you need cash, you need to be able to pick up the phone and call him or her right away. I know a lot of you probably remember trying to get in line with the PPP program. How quickly were you able to go to your bank, and how easy was that to get done? Evaluate those banking relationships, as well as understanding what your cash runway is. Right? If something were to happen, how far out can you go from a cash standpoint? And so those are all things just from a very tactical standpoint of ensuring that I've got the resources if something drastic does happen, like another COVID.
Yeah, and I'm smiling because you guys at least have bankers. No, seriously, because in Ukraine, because of the economic turbulence, the loans is just something that you take as a business when you're like this close to death, because we even have mortgages at like 20% annual, like private mortgages. So sane people don't take loans, and you cannot really recapitalize. You cannot really, fund your investments, etc. So we're in a different reality, and that is because of the fluctuating currencies. Yeah, if the bank provides you a loan in Ukrainian hryvnia, then it might be worth a half of that a year from now. So that's different extent of turbulence. But actually what we did, back to the question of how to recession proof it, call me crazy, but we kind of saw this war situation coming, and 3 months before the war started, we bought an office. Just understanding that we will need to stand for this, and the first half year of the war, we were renovating it. Which is another talk for another hour. But at least now we're absolutely stable in terms of one of the biggest expenses is office and the workshop, or 2 in 1. So at least, and it's big enough to even rent out a half of it should we need it. So basically, it was our investment in something that would keep us afloat if it gets really, really bad. Luckily, it didn't. So that's how we did it.
All right. Well, we are almost at time. Really appreciate you guys joining. Irina, thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared with your experiences. Certainly, there's similar scenarios that we're looking at here, and so just being intentional about what we're doing, getting ahead of the things that could be to come is something that's vitally important, and I appreciate you prompting us on that. We're going to continue to do these once a month as long as you guys keep showing up. So would love to hear additional topics that you guys would like to discuss. One that I've heard from a few people is technology and software. It's certainly something that we have a lot of conversations around. And Irina, I know you've got a lot to say
Shall I come
about.
back next month?
Yeah, you might be back next month. But yeah, be on the lookout for that. This will be recorded, and so you should get a recording of it, but it probably doesn't matter to you because you guys were on it, but just know that it will be. And really appreciate you guys joining what we're calling the Interiorscape SWOT group, where we talk about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing our industry. Thank you guys for joining. You make it a great start to your week, and we'll talk to you next month.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Good luck standing through it. And there's an email on the screen if you want to ask any more questions after this session. Take care, stay strong, you'll make it.
Thanks, Josh.
Adios.
Thanks, Raina. Bye.
Are we still on stage?